order to pump this thing up to a 20 trillion, $200 trillion asset, we need larger and larger pools of capital. It's not going to come from retail buying $50 a week. And so de-risking it at the state level makes way for enormous pools of capital to try and capture some of this upside. And I do think the treasury companies are the next step in that mission. I think I would rather have some percentage of Bitcoiners working directly with the state and the banking system, financial system, so that we can ensure that our voice is heard. I don't really see it as turning our backs on the original ideology. I see this as a necessary step towards $100 trillion market cap and Bitcoin being base money, right? So we still need to be vigilant. We still need to be working towards the cypherpunk future that we desire. The energy is upstream of all human flourishing. So if you want to have a successful country, you need to have a lot of energy. The real game here is the world needs to identify Bitcoin as a store of value asset first.
Before we get start with all the topics, give the people and the listeners some background of like who you are and most importantly, why you're excited about Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. So I studied mechanical engineering in college, ultimately graduated with a business degree. Then I went straight into Oracle selling enterprise software for about 4 years. Thought my life was, leading up to that moment, I thought that was who I was, my identity. And I quickly found that although the career stuff was going well, I wanted more out of life. I just couldn't see myself sitting in that chair every day, every year. And so I went through a yoga teacher training. I started experimenting with psychedelics, started reading a lot, and ultimately left the budding career at Oracle. And my girlfriend at the time, now wife, sold everything we owned, and we bought a one-way ticket to India. This was back in 2014. And then we traveled for about 5 years working remotely and building online businesses. Digital nomading started to become popular in recent years, and we were kind of doing that. So just set up shop around the world, rent an apartment for a few months, work there, do whatever is cool to do in that local country. And towards the tail end of that nomadic period, discovered Bitcoin. This was in 2017. Like most people, bumped into it a few times prior, but 2017 is when it stuck. And also, like most people, number go up is what got me interested, actually interested. And so I traded all the shitcoins in 2017, thought I was an absolute genius, then lost all those gains more or less in 2018. And then first half of 2018 is when I did the proper deep dive into Bitcoin, taught myself economics from the ground up, read all the books, just obsessive studying. And out of that obsessive period, I realized that Bitcoin actually was the thing here, and that blockchains are not necessarily general purpose technology, and sort of starting then focused all energy on Bitcoin. And then did all kinds of random stuff in the industry when I knew I wanted to make a career change. And, I had a consulting shop. I was selling products for other people in the industry. Ultimately met Corey Clipston, the CEO of Swan, at a Bitcoin conference in San Francisco in 2019. And then later that year joined Swan and have been there for 5.5 years now. Very proud of what we built. Before joining Swan, I started reading about Bitcoin and writing about Bitcoin, like I said. And I published an essay exploring Bitcoin through the lens of mycology, or the study of fungi, which I just had a personal interest in for about a decade prior to finding Bitcoin. And I noticed the similarities between Bitcoin as a decentralized type of organism that lives online. And anyway, started publishing essays on that. And to my surprise, the Bitcoin community was very interested in those essays. And so I kind of became known as the Bitcoin mushroom guy during that era. And side note, I actually long for that era of Bitcoin Twitter, when the content was more philosophical, the community was a little more focused. And, since then, let's say 5 years later, the content is much, or 7 years later now. Wow, that's crazy. The discussion is very different. It's clear that Bitcoin is becoming financialized. And so the community started fracturing into different groups. I don't view this necessarily as a bad thing. I view this as a necessary step towards Bitcoin's ultimate takeover. And so I long for it in the personal sense because I liked the discussions more back then, but this is good for Bitcoin and there's nothing we can do to stop it. And so, yeah, that's more or less where we are today. I think you also asked why I like Bitcoin, and I definitely have a libertarian perspective on the world. And so, what drew me initially was the personal sovereignty side and the ability to create a monetary system that's not controlled by any central actor or group of actors. And so I view it as a tool to liberate humanity from centralized money printing. And I think the downstream effects of having a market based solution to money is enormous. And I think it will take a long time to unwind the issues we've created from having a fiat based system for so long. But I'm here for that ride, and we're already starting to see the benefits all over the world. And so I could not be more bullish or excited about the industry.
It's super interesting, and this core ethos is kind of also the main thing on Bitcoin, but it's kind of, I think that's what a lot of people also criticize on like the treasury companies and like this simping to politicians, where is that why we're actually in Bitcoin? Is that the core ethos of Bitcoin? Is that the freedom thing? And you also said you're writing essays currently. I think you mentioned also treasury companies. Is that the angle you're taking it, or like how do you approach that topic?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty obvious rift in the community right now, which is that earlier ideological Bitcoiners would say, hey, I got into this thing to skip the banks. I got in this thing to not have to listen to what the government says, right? And I totally empathize with that point of view. That's how I came into Bitcoin. I still believe that that's mostly true. However, once Bitcoin's large enough, it's going to garner the attention of the powers that be. And there's nothing we can do about that. And so I think I would rather have some percentage of Bitcoiners working directly with the state and the banking system, financial system, so that we can ensure that our voice is heard, right? If we don't pay attention to Bitcoin and we just let the politicians do whatever they want, I would see high risk that the politicians steer the policy decisions in a way that harms Bitcoiners and potentially Bitcoin. And so I'm very happy about places or firms like the Bitcoin Policy Institute. We have proper Bitcoiners in DC advocating for our community. And so I think that it's a necessary step. In terms of the financialization side, I really don't empathize with this view. I think it's just a ideological point of view divorced from reality. And what I mean is, if Bitcoin really is the best monetary asset of all time, which I certainly believe, then of course governments and corporations are going to adopt this thing. And so I don't really see it as turning our backs on the original ideology. I see this as a necessary step towards $100 trillion market cap and Bitcoin being base money. And so I think it's inevitable. It's a sign that we're winning, but it doesn't mean we should just sacrifice our principles to the altar of NGU, right? So we still need to be vigilant. We still need to be working towards the cypherpunk future that we desire. And so I see that coming up in a much smaller percentage of the Bitcoin community today, but I think that ethos is still alive. And yeah, of course, NGU blinds people. So there will be people who do sacrifice the principles for NGU. And it's on us as a community to stay vigilant and self-police those things and make sure we don't just all get rich and lose the potential we have here, which is separating money from state.
It's a natural progression, I think. It's so funny if we want to throw, if we really want to throw off the traditional financial system, of course we first have to kind of get all those things in place. It's not like that there's the fiat system and there's the Bitcoin system, and then one day we are switching that off and like just having Bitcoin rails and like no stable coins, no fiat, no credit system, nothing like that. Just like Bitcoin. I think that will probably never happen, or like in the very far future, because there will always be some credit systems. Like people will always like borrow against like those financial instruments are very natural, even in the free market without money printer. So yeah, it's a very natural progression. But I feel that because it can feel frustrating if you're coming here for to throw over the government, and then we're simping to like Donald Trump being at the at the Bitcoin conference. So like, I see that point, but it's like if you're complaining that Bitcoin is winning, like that's just that feels weird. 100 trillion just seems slow to me when you mentioned that seems bearish.
Yeah, I think it is a little bearish, but you start saying larger numbers than that, and people think you're absolutely nuts. Uh, One more point on ideology. So we had a similar situation with medium of exchange versus store of value and sort of the order of operations for how a monetary asset becomes monetized. And early on in Bitcoin's history, there was this false, misguided belief, we might say, that Bitcoin is for payments. And the first thing we need to do is just start buying things with Bitcoin because Bitcoin's cheaper and faster than the fiat payment systems. And that was never true, except maybe in the very beginning when no blocks are filled. And, yeah, you might make an argument. But I think that that argument was wrong. And as soon as people started paying with Bitcoin, they realized they have an accounting headache, they have a tax headache. And so there's really not natural incentives in the West to use Bitcoin in payments today. Now, if you're in a developing country with a horrible currency and fragmented payment networks, yeah, sure, there's a marginal improvement for you in that world. But the real game here is the world needs to identify Bitcoin as a store of value asset first. And once it's widely held, widely distributed, and as a function of adoption, volatility goes down, then you're setting the stages for Bitcoin to potentially be used as a wide stream payment method of payment. And so it's really order of operations: store value first, then medium of exchange, and if we get there, unit of account at some point. And I think we will price the world in Bitcoin at some point. I think that's natural that we'll get to that. But to your other point, it will take a very long time. And yes, I do expect governments to hold on to their monetary printer because that's a massive source of power. Now, where Bitcoin plays a role here is it would create a model here where if the government prints too much money, their citizens have a way out. So they can vote with their dollar and shift their asset allocation out of US Treasuries or dollars or US equities and put them into Bitcoin. And that acts as a restraint on excessive money printing. And I think that's all we really can hope for in this world. And I think that that is enough, right? It gives people choice, and choice is enough to push back on excessive money printing. And that can create a world for everyone to be successful, because store your wealth in Bitcoin, fine if you have to use the payment system of the state. And if you really need to make payments outside of the state's purview, I sincerely hope we have cypherpunk tools to allow this at scale.
I'm always surprised how fast we're going. I'm like, if I look at the Bitcoin development, like I came in 2020 and I kind of made a plan for me, like, oh, how do I see this shaking out? And I was way too conservative. I've not at all had it on my bingo card that America will have a president that is actively speaking with the Bitcoin community and is on conference. Like that just blew me out of the way. Even El Salvador, like having a state that, yeah, they are very small, like in the grand scheme of things, like they're like tiny when you compare it to like America or like the world forces, but them already buying Bitcoin, embracing it as a mean of exchange. How was it for you to see those changes and how fast we are already? We're just 16 years in. Like Bitcoin Bitcoin is still like a teenager. How do you look at the fast development?
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm as bullish as I possibly can be on Bitcoin over the long term, but I did not see the states embracing Bitcoin occurring this quickly. I was expecting that to be more out of desperation, and instead it looks like the current administration is adopting Bitcoin out of opportunity in a positive sense. And what does this mean for Bitcoin as a market? Well, fast or rewind 5 years, let's say 2020, I would say the biggest risk to Bitcoin then was the state fighting back. Hey, we're going to lose the monopoly on money printing. We need to attack this thing, or let's neuter this thing. And instead, the US government did a 180 and they're leaning in as hard as you could possibly imagine. And so the biggest risk to Bitcoin just became a tailwind in just a few short years. And I think that de-risking moment of seeing the US government lean in is massively bullish, and it pulls the timeline forward dramatically because at a almost $2.5 trillion asset, in order to pump this thing up to a 20 trillion, $200 trillion asset, we need larger and larger pools of capital. It's not going to come from retail buying $50 a week. And so de-risking it at the state level makes way for enormous pools of capital to try and capture some of this upside. And that's what we're seeing. Now, it will
I
still take time, right, to build those bridges or build those tubes to pour the capital in, but we're already seeing it happening now. And I do think the treasury companies are the next step in that mission, right? You're allowing different pools of capital to get a piece and buying in an equity format. And yeah, there's pros and cons to that approach, but I think we're going to continually see new pipes bolted onto the Bitcoin thing, so big capital can flow.
I also checked out your website, even if you just scroll through your articles on your essays that you're writing, I love how you phrase that Bitcoin is a pioneer species. That sounds really interesting. What do you mean? What do you mean? And I also see what you meant before with the mushroom, the Bitcoin mushroom thing. So I just want to show this to people. I think there's some interesting reads out there, and there are some interesting opinions out there. But like, what do you mean with like pioneer species? I haven't read the article to be frank.
No problem. Happy to explain. So in ecology, there's a type of organism that is called the pioneer species. And what a pioneer species does is it colonizes desolate landscapes, and it's kind of the first organism to convert, let's say, a barren rock or an island in the middle of the ocean. How does that become something more than just a dead rock in the ocean? Right? The pioneer species colonize that dead rock. It could be a seed dropped from birds pooping on the island. It could be plants that drift and land to shore, many other ways. And the classic example is a lichen. So a lichen is a symbiosis between a plant and a fungus, and that would colonize that rock. The fungal organism essentially uses chemistry to digest the rock. It breaks down the rock and liberates useful minerals out of the rock. And the plant uses photosynthesis to create energy from the sun. So those two work together and they digest a barren rock and they start to create soil. And as that rock breaks down, other organisms are then able to live there as well. And so it kicks off a process of ecological succession, bringing waves of more complex life to that dead rock in the ocean. And over the long scale, that dead rock becomes a thriving ecosystem. And it's all because that one pioneer species kicked off that process. And I use that analogy to explain Bitcoin mining, right? A lot of people think about Bitcoin mining as just plugging into the grid, find cheap energy, mine some Bitcoin. But what also happens in Bitcoin mining is Bitcoin miners serve as an incentive to go deploy new energy assets. And so if you look at the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, that's the famous case study. There's a mountainous region with a national park, tons of hydro potential, and very poor people living nearby. And they don't have very much energy. And they don't have the capital to go put this huge hydro facility there. And they don't have the capital to run that high voltage transmission down to the population centers either. So they're kind of stuck without energy. So the Bitcoin miners come in and they're the first customer of that energy asset. They're the anchor tenant. And what that leads to from an incentive standpoint is it becomes easier to get financing to deploy new energy generation assets because the Bitcoin miners are there day one buying all that energy. So your ROI in the energy asset is much better, and the capital that would be deployed is de-risked. So it essentially creates an incentive for new energy generation all around the world, which is what happened in the Congo. They dropped shipping containers, dammed up some rivers. Now they're sending power through the region. And it wouldn't have been possible without Bitcoin miners serving as that pioneer species. And as soon as you have energy in a location, what happens? Then you can create industry. Then now there's new energy, they can go build stuff. And if you're building stuff with a factory, you're going to need people to live nearby. Those people need a place to live, they need food, they need services. So you drop a little energy asset and human prosperity flourishes around that energy asset because energy is upstream of all human flourishing. And so that's similar to ecological succession. And if we go back to that lichen on the dead rock in the middle of the ocean, as soon as that ecosystem becomes mature, that lichen no longer serves a purpose and more complex life crowds it out. And then hopefully that organism reproduces and then it goes and finds a new desolate landscape to colonize. And so it's a constant process of rehabilitating landscapes and building complexity in life. And Bitcoin miners, as soon as that energy asset is mature and the customers arrive, the miners aren't profitable anymore. So they take those machines and then they go seed a new energy asset and they go buy energy elsewhere, kicking off the same process. So we're seeing little isolated energy pockets popping up all around the world. Wherever they go, human flourishing follows.
That's an amazing comparison with Bitcoin mining. It kind of makes me wonder what will happen to the overall world order once we have Bitcoin mining, canning, being able to facilitate those regions with more power and with more energy. How do you think about like the global world order where we now have like America and Europe, then like maybe China, but then there's like also Africa and India, especially you've been to India, as you said. How do you look at this globalization of like having one money thing, but also with Bitcoin mining being able to kind of give a region that is kind of dead do a new life with Bitcoin mining?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to the question. So what happens if we distribute more energy around the world? And what happens if we have a global money? How does that impact international development? So first on energy, as I said, energy is upstream of all human flourishing. So if you want to have a successful country, you need to have a lot of energy. And if you have a lot of energy, you can produce things locally instead of relying on foreign imports, which are more expensive. And if you have a lot of energy, you have jobs locally as well. So simply having energy is required. And if you want to have any sort of modern conveniences, if you want to protect yourself from heat or cold, if you want to have hospitals, if you want to have transportation, all these things require enormous amounts of energy. Not to mention AI, which is obviously the next big wave of energy production, will all flow to that. And so it's necessary. There's no wealthy countries that don't have a large amount of energy. So GDP is highly correlated to energy production. Obviously, those variables are linked. It's complex, but you need a lot of energy. That's the takeaway. And so I see Bitcoin mining bringing energy to regions that otherwise wouldn't have the capital required to build out the energy assets. There's a company in Africa called Gridless, which I absolutely love. And they're deploying micro scale energy assets in rural areas in Africa and others, but a large part of their business is doing this. And they're essentially solving the last mile problem of energy production in Africa. So in the major cities, they usually have energy. It's not as reliable as the US, but they have some. If you get rural, there's absolutely no energy because it's cost prohibitive to generate the energy and or to transfer it long distances for such a small population center. And so they're essentially stuck and there's no reason for them to have power because the incentives don't allow it. Enter Bitcoin mining, they can go dam up a tiny little river and create microgrids for local communities. And whatever the local community doesn't consume, the Bitcoin miners are happy to purchase. And so it essentially brings power to these rural areas. That gives them a chance to charge their cell phone, to learn online, to give their kids a better future, etc. And so I think energy around the world will be more widely distributed and it will find a home in areas that previously it couldn't. And so that's massively bullish for humanity. On the money side, I think Bitcoin is the native money of the internet. I think Jack Dorsey may have said that. And what that means is if you're living in a country with a less desirable currency, which is the vast majority of the world, you now have the opportunity to save the fruits of your labor in a fixed supply asset. And so while your local currency is being debased, you can now store your wealth in Bitcoin. And currently, what do they use? They store their wealth, if they can find them, in physical US dollars. Otherwise, most of the world, they store their wealth in goats, chickens, cows, cinder blocks, sun-baked bricks, tin, sheet metal for roofs, right? They try to find some commodity that stores wealth better than their local currency. And so they find those alternatives. But once the world realizes that Bitcoin's actually the best form of digital capital, I suspect those folks will have a much easier time saving for the future. And if you don't have any savings, it's very hard to take a risk. It's very hard to start a business. It's very hard to protect your family. And so it's good for the individual. It's good for the family. It's good for the community. It's good for countries. It's good for the corporations. It's good for everyone.
It also kind of dematerializes things. It's a side point that I just noticed, but like if you are no longer saving in real estate, for example, in Austria, a lot of people use real estate as their personal savings account. I don't know, probably a similar thing in America. I know in Australia and Canada is also like kind of a similar thing. That's why housing prices I keep rocketing, because people are keep buying them as their savings account and not just as a place to live. And Bitcoin kind of dematerializes those things and makes then the savings account way more like flexible in that regard. And I just love that. It makes like housing cheaper and makes all the things cheaper and it makes things really easier. I I have to ask, like, how is Bitcoin? I mean, it's unrelated to what I just said, like, but how do you compare Bitcoin to a mushroom? I've seen the article, and I think you mentioned it in the intro.
Yeah, absolutely. So, quick note on the real estate side. Yeah, that's a profound point, which is that today it's hard to store your value long term. You can't use dollars, so you're essentially forced to invest your savings in order to maintain purchasing power and maybe even grow it. And so that leads to real estate, that leads to big tech stocks, that leads to fine art, all kinds of lesser stores of value. And then Bitcoin enters, and Bitcoin is just a superior way to store value compared to everything else. Today, it's still a little bit more volatile, so maybe some people would only allocate a percentage of their net worth. But at maturity, there's no reason to store value in a home or bid up tech stocks at 50x earnings or something like that. That's totally crazy. That's a product of a debasing currency. And so, yeah, once we shift marginal flows to Bitcoin, away from real estate, away from stocks, away from anything else, housing becomes cheaper, much closer to the consumption value rather than the monetary premium on top. And that's a massive win for our society. We don't need to play money games with our housing. We need to get people in homes so they can build for their future. And so very, very happy with that path. How do I view Bitcoin as a mycelium? Yeah, this is a big topic, but the way I see the world, technology is similar to ecology. I don't think there's very much different. I think the same forces that lead to evolution in biology extend into the human realm with technology. And so these are tools that help us increase our carrying capacity on the world, helps us makes our lives easier. And as we create new tools, those new tools shape the world. We become different in the process. And as we become different, then we go create more tools. And then those tools shape the world. And then the world shapes the tools. So I view that as sort of a symbiotic process that occurs with humans. In terms of Bitcoin, I think it appears to be something like a living digital superorganism, a new type of organism. This organism pays people to keep it alive in the form of issuance, supply issuance, and that leads to people buying machines, setting up a computer network to mine, do the accounting, and facilitate the needs of the network. And then as individuals, we go play our part. We have an incentive because of NGU to support this thing, to build this thing, to protect this thing. And so it sort of evolves as this weird living organism. And if you look at it through that lens, Bitcoin actually responds to its environment in the same way that an organism does. So let's say, let's explain mycelium, then I'll finish that point. So mycelium is the primary form that a fungus takes. most people think of fungi as just the mushrooms, but that's a minority of the kingdom. And so you might think of button mushrooms at the grocery store. You might think of the emoji mushroom, the amanita. You might think of psilocybin mushrooms. But the fungal kingdom is very complex, very diverse. And the primary form is the mycelial form, which you can think of as an underground root system. It's a one cell walled system of tubes and pumps. It's like industrial scaffolding in the soil that's microscopic. And this mycelium connects all the trees together. Those trees, yeah, that's a great picture. Those trees trade resources between each other. They essentially broker deals, they buy low, they sell high. And so there's this massive underground economy. And the mycelial form is a decentralized network. And there is no central processing unit. There's no brain. There's no decision makers. It's more of a network that makes decisions. If you cut a mycelial network in half, you don't kill the mycelial network. You just have two now. And it adapts and it routes around. And underground, there's this constant battle, this microbiological battle going on between different funguses, bacteria, viruses, insects, etc. And in that really, really competitive environment, you create a robust type of organism that can survive under very hostile conditions. And let's say there's a bacteria trying to attack this mycelial network. What happens? The mycelial network sends information through the network. The little mushroom scientists create new custom enzymes to go defend themselves against that predator. And over time, that mycelial organism builds a chemical library of defense molecules to protect itself. So it's essentially learning from its environment and adapting to the attackers. And it becomes stronger over time. Bitcoin's similar. Let's say there's a software bug someone identifies in the network. That information is sent through the network. It finds its way to the developers or little mushroom scientists. They create a new software patch, fixes the problem, or a little enzyme, if we're using the analogy. And over time, the Bitcoin network learns and it gets better and stronger over time as it interfaces with the exterior world. So it kind of resembles some sort of an organism. And the mycelial network organism is an ancient structure, and it's been working for fungi for billions of years. The earliest form of complex life that we've discovered in fossil records have been mycelial networks. And so we've had about 5 or 6 great extinction events on our planet. Meteor comes, kills all the dinosaurs. What happens? The sun blocks out, the reptiles die, the mammals emerge. And in that whole process, mushrooms inherit the world during these cataclysmic events. So they're a very, very robust type of structure. And the fact that Bitcoin mimics this decentralized network archetype gives me confidence long term that Bitcoin as a design is very robust to sort of any type of attacks, and it will continue to learn and evolve over time. So it leads me to believe that the design of Bitcoin is strong and will last more or less indefinitely. If humans find it valuable, we'll keep it alive forever.
I love that comparison, and I never heard it. And I liked also the comparison to a virus, like having being on a host, and then all of a sudden the host is infected with that virus, and he carries it with him, and then he finds another host, and kind of the host infects another host with the same virus, and it kind of keeps spreading. When we build out like the orange pilling, like someone gets the Bitcoin virus, and then like they spread it. But this fungus, what was the name? Mycelial. Like I'm not in this world at all, and then I'm also not natively speaking English, so I'm struggling a little with those words. I just call it mushroom for sake of easiness. But that makes a lot of sense, and I wasn't aware that there's such a big network down under the ground with the trees together. Like I knew that trees are like super deep. I know that because in my old home where my parents live, we had a nut tree. I have no clue how it's called in English, but we had the tree, and we had to cut it down because the tree was starting to level up the pool. The tree was basically slowly cutting into the pool. So that was showing me on a real world example how strong the roots of a tree can be and how wide those networks of roots go. That was fascinating. I wasn't aware that those mushrooms also have the same kind of connection as trees.
Yeah, I think that the latest thinking on tree roots is they actually evolved to facilitate symbiosis with mycelial mushrooms. Old plants, like ancient plants, they didn't really have roots, and roots evolved over time into what we know of as trees now. And I think it's logical that they were seeking out mushroom allies in the process. There's essentially no trees today that don't have mycelial networks connected to them underground. And what the tree roots provide is they mine minerals underground and they sell them back to the tree in exchange for fats and sugars that the tree produces through photosynthesis. And so without those minerals, a tree could maybe be 1 meter tall, but it wouldn't be strong enough to create giant trees that we have now. And that trade acts as an immune system for the forest. And those mushrooms broker deals across species lines. So why would a big oak tree that's starting to die trade its carbon to a small birch tree, right? It doesn't make sense from a biological standpoint. Why would one organism share resources with a competitor? Well, the mushrooms actually create sort of a cooperation type environment underground. It's not pure cooperation. It's kind of a co-opetition. There's cooperation and competition, but the net result is the mushrooms treat the forest as one organism that they can use to trade resources. And so, yeah, it's quite fascinating. The whole fungi world is insane, and I highly recommend reading Mycelium of Money. Guy Swan's read them all, and you will be blown away by how interesting this kingdom is. I view it as kind of the forgotten kingdom. A couple more mushroom facts for you. Most of our medicine comes from mushrooms and plants as well, but the latest research is that mushrooms produce the molecules we want, and then we harvest them out of the plant. But essentially the mushrooms created them because they're the masters of chemistry. And so they're creating novel compounds to protect themselves from predators. But it just so happens that those same molecules help us in our fight against bacteria or viruses or whatever. Yeah, the whole kingdom goes crazy. We could go forever on that topic.
The first time I ever made any money, I got myself from that money a watch. And ever since then, I collect timepieces to remember times where I achieved some milestone. That's why I got the Bitcoin 2025 edition when I went to my first ever American Bitcoin conference. So for me, the Bitcoin watches from CoinVigilant represents the time that we are living in. For every person that wears a Bitcoin watch, I know they are representing sound money to the outside world. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. I know how big of a hurdle it can be to have self-custody, but it's so freaking important to make that first step. We have to make sure it's as easy and simple as possible. And that's exactly what BitBox did. BitBox created the simplest and the easiest hardware wallet to use to get into self-custody. So get yourself a BitBox down from the link in the description. And when you use code Robin, you even get a 5% discount. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. And we have right now a summer sale going on for 15% off. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today for $186. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. I might have an interesting one. If the mycelium network is kind of Bitcoin, where does the internet and electricity come into that? Because Bitcoin kind of needs the internet and electricity. I mean, I know we could basically also work without, but like in the global sense, it kind of needs internet and electricity.
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't thought about where electricity fits in here. Maybe electricity is more fundamental. It's smaller. Maybe electricity is more like oxygen or water, which are essentially required for all life on Earth. And so, yeah, I would think of them as more base level stuff. And we need oxygen, we need water. Mycelium uses that shared, you can think of it as like a baseline life protocol, water plus oxygen plus carbon, right? Those kind of things are the fundamental building blocks. Mycelium uses that, so an order of extraction higher than the base. And then mycelium connects to trees, and maybe trees are, you could use loosely as an analogy for people or corporations or families or governments. And those folks benefit from using the Bitcoin network underground, right? You couldn't be successful financially in today's sense without having a Bitcoin allocation. Maybe that's hyperbolic, but something approaching that.
I love that example. It really also gives you, because like we kind of know, okay, Bitcoin is really hard to kill to the point where I cannot imagine a logical, a good way to kill it. All the ways I could imagine Bitcoin being killed is like so outrageously unlikely that I don't even want to think about it. But for normal people out there, and I've been to some family gatherings recently, they are still asking, oh, like, the government can just shut it off, right? Like, yeah, no, actually not. And those comparisons are really, I think, helpful to explain to them, like, oh, like, can the government just shut up, like, like those underground roots of mycelium? Yeah, like maybe in like one spot, but it's impossible to kill it all over the world. So yeah, you can maybe challenge the Bitcoin adoption in like Austria if you really try hard and like completely isolate Austria from the internet basically and really crack down. But it's not possible like all over the world. And even Austria is really hard because a lot of Bitcoin is already here. So I love that comparison because it shows the strong nature of kind of Bitcoin.
That's right. Yeah, and using Austria as an example, let's say the government goes hard against Bitcoin in Austria. That just creates an incentive for another country to take advantage of the demand for Bitcoin, right? We often hear this between the US and China. Well, if the US goes hard at Bitcoin, China has a really hard decision to make. Do they follow in our footsteps and lean in, or do they take an adversarial posture towards that? And I think just looking at the game theory abroad, there's no winning strategy that involves skipping Bitcoin, right? Like you can kick out all the Bitcoiners in Austria and make it impossible, but you're really just hurting Austrian people and the Austrian country. And so that's not a very good strategy. And similar to the internet, you can put your head in the sand and say, we're not going to digitize the world. but that just puts you at a competitive disadvantage to your peers. And so I don't think, I mean, maybe some countries will take that posture, a negative posture towards Bitcoin, but when the rubber meets the road, it will hurt them and it will be looked back on as a massive mistake, right? I just saw that Bulgaria sold a bunch of Bitcoin like 5 or 10 years ago. And if they would have held that Bitcoin, that would be the current value of that Bitcoin, if they would have held it, would be 80% of their government debt. But instead they sold it, right? You saw Germany sell their Bitcoin at like 50K, simultaneously decommissioning nuclear plants and doing other crazy stuff. So just like energy, just like Bitcoin, countries who take an ideological stance against those things, they're just going to harm their citizens, and it will be obvious in the fullness of time.
And they have a website uh, if where they show how much Germany has missed out on. I probably don't find it on the quick side, but they sold Bitcoin really early on. Like it was like summer 2024. So yeah, it's probably like doubled. And I don't know, like 50,000 Bitcoin are worth right now, but they sold it for only half of it, or maybe not even half of it. So they lost out on on a big value chunk there already, like just in one year. So it will be really fun to see how big of a mistake it will be in like 10 years. But honestly, I kind of like it. I like if governments don't hold Bitcoin, give it back to the people, and the Bitcoin can screw those Bitcoin up. So I'm a fan of that actually, and so I'm proud to say I own more Bitcoin than the German government.
Absolutely. And yeah, I totally agree, right? The faster the corporations and the governments buy Bitcoin, that essentially decreases the gains for normal people, right? Who haven't bought Bitcoin yet. Obviously, the current holders benefit from those large buyers, but in a perfect world, Bitcoin is widely distributed amongst individuals, and then Wall Street, corporations, governments, etc., buy it up, and then we get paid for those late buyers, right? But I do fear that retail is not seizing the opportunity right now. At least in my personal life, I'm not seeing a wave of people coming in the same way that we did in 2017, 2021. And so I don't know what could change that. Like if Bitcoin's 200K tomorrow, does retail wake up? I don't know. I fear that retail is just going to miss the boat going forward. And that's a huge, huge bummer because it would be way better for the world if the average individual took advantage of the upside before Wall Street.
Why do you think retail is sleeping on Bitcoin so hard?
I don't know the answer. I would have to start with the assumption that retail investors are just bad at investing to begin with, and they're time poor and they don't have the priors maybe or the curiosity maybe required to understand what's going on. And the reality is NGU brings everyone in. And so I guess I would have assumed due to poor financial health around the world that more and more people would find Bitcoin. But I think the reality is individuals need to feel pain before they start looking for a solution. And so if we go back to COVID money printer era, around 2021, money printers going crazy. And speaking from Swan's point of view, we noticed a huge increase in boomers buying Bitcoin for the first time, right? They look around and say, wait a minute, why are we printing all this money? Is my retirement at risk? And that led people to search for a solution, ultimately finding Bitcoin. But at this stage, I don't know how much more the average person needs to see before they start looking for solutions. And so the only conclusion I can come up with is some sort of financial nihilism, meaning individuals, young people especially, they believe that there's no way out of this mess. And so they're not thinking about saving money. They just gave up. And that leads to short-term thinking and, just YOLO life for the moment and not really planning ahead. Probably correlated to people not having kids. They're not buying homes. They're not having kids. And those are long-term decisions that usually arise out of feeling comfortable in your economic situation. And so I wish retail would come back in droves. I fear it's not going to happen anytime soon.
I I feel like it's the same why people stick with a job that they don't like. Like so many people have jobs they don't like. Why most people do just the thing that most people do. It's so frustrating to see that people are saving actually in dollars and euros. Like there are people that like literally just save in euros. Don't even have an ETF. Like we are shitting on like gold bucks and real estate people and on like stock investors and ETF people. But those at least get that the euro and the dollar is no longer a good savings vehicle. So they at least got like some portion of the problem already right. There are a lot of people out there that don't have any assets. I think in America, it's somewhere around 50% of the population that don't have any assets and 50% have asset, which is fascinating for me. I mean, the one thing is if you're struggling with income and you don't have enough money to save even, then either your income is really bad or your expenses are really bad. That's another problem. And I get that comment sometimes a lot, like, oh, like I cannot make enough money to save in Bitcoin. Yeah, like Bitcoin won't help you there. Like that's a different set of problems that Bitcoin cannot help you. But assuming you have extra savings, if you save in fiat, I don't know, like how the heck like how the heck does 50% of the population save in fiat and in US dollars? Like that's a mind-boggling thing. Like at least the people that save in real estate, at least they understand some things. So like how the heck is 50? That's just I cannot explain this. Like it's really hard for me to fathom. I've invested since I'm 17 years old.
Yeah, good for you. I think in America there's this pressure to um, keep up with the Joneses, as the phrase suggests, like just to continually ramp up your expenses and not live with between your means. Like if you look at credit card debt, it's like 2.5 trillion or something like that in the US. And yeah, the average person has a negative net worth, owns no assets. And to your previous point, it does come down to personal finance first. You need to earn more than you spend. And once you have a surplus, you can start saving. And yeah, hopefully a large portion of your savings goes into Bitcoin.
Yeah, I even thought about doing that and getting some interesting people on in personal finance and like how to up your game with income and stuff like that. Because I actually get there are some comments around that, like, oh, like I'm struggling in life in general. I get Bitcoin, but like I have like $20 left to invest in Bitcoin, and even if Bitcoin does phenomenally good, it will still take like a long time. And at that point, if you just have $20, it's probably better to just reinvest in yourself and like in education, leveling up your skills, and don't even bother with Bitcoin in the first place. So I might do something like that. That's an interesting idea. But yeah, I'm just bothered by people having surplus income and then saving in US dollars. Yeah, like it's your own fault, man.
Totally.
I have no empathy.
I would recommend Morgan Richard if you haven't talked to her. She does a great job on personal finance for Bitcoiners.
Oh, had
Pierre,
Pierre
wife.
had Pierre had on, but I will reach out to Morgan actually.
Yeah, she's excellent. I've learned a lot from her, and she gives a pretty grounded approach. Where I think one of her points that stuck with me the most is that you shouldn't over allocate to Bitcoin. And what I mean is, if you're all in on Bitcoin and then you have a financial issue in your life and you all of a sudden need $50,000 for something, well, what if you don't have any savings outside of Bitcoin? We're in a bear market and you're a forced seller at the bottom because you didn't plan ahead for dollar risks, right? And so what happens with a lot of people is they end up having to sell Bitcoin at the bottom and they end up with less Bitcoin than they would have if they would have responsibly allocated to Bitcoin and still had a cushion for unforeseen costs. Does that make sense?
I like the approach that James Jack is doing. He's using gold as a cash reserve. So he has as Bitcoin basically as his main thing, but he holds something in gold where he can liquidate it really quickly. And gold is not as volatile up and down, and it's still outperforming fiat by a long run, long term. That's interesting, but yeah, it does make sense. If you are an individual, if you're a family, if you're a company, do not go all in a sense where you don't have any buffer, and that buffer can have different things, but you should have something where you can, there's a short-term expense coming your way. How the hell I'm going to pay for it? Because maybe it's the bear market now, I have to liquidate Bitcoin. Yeah, it makes sense. I'm just I'm just all in. Maybe not the most responsible way, but I also don't have family. I'm 26 years old. I'm slowly starting that because now I have like 3 freelancers working for me and all those things. So like I'm getting a little bit more conservative now. I'm thinking now like, hey, like what if there's like no income, like and I need to pay something and all those things. So I'm getting it slowly. If you're now like, I don't know, 45 years old, you have 3 kids, you have a small company to run. Oh yeah, you need some fiat cash. You can always liquidate the Bitcoin, but there might be some benefits of having some liquid fiat cash on there. That's an interesting point. I will invite her. I'll tell her.
Awesome. Yeah, and she references that too. Like, what's your emergency fund? It depends dramatically on your stage of life and your potential risk. So if you're a single dude who's 22 with $10,000 net worth, yeah, sure, go all in. Who cares? But if you have more risk in family life or business, or your income's at risk, you might want 3 months or 6 months or 12 months of your expenses in dollars or gold ready to deploy. And it's counterintuitive, but that is a good strategy to hold more Bitcoin long term. And a lot of Bitcoiners could benefit from that, because going back to James Check, what does he show with on-chain data? The retail investors buy the top and they sell the bottom. And that's obviously a pretty bad strategy. And, if they knew what they were holding, that would help. And if they planned their personal finances better, hopefully they could sell something else at the bottom rather than the Bitcoin.
I 100% agree. Yeah. What are your thoughts on? We touched on it a little bit with like we want Bitcoin to be a payment system. Do you promote already using it more and more as a payment system to kind of push the adoption forward and have that media of exchange come sooner rather than later? I know like there's Jack Dorsey and Jeff Booth, and I think those are the 2 main voices that say like, oh, we need medium of exchange. Otherwise, why the heck do we even have store of value? They phrase it better than me, but that's the basic saying. How do you look at like the medium of exchange and the payment system of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think at maturity, we need to have a robust payment system going on top of Bitcoin. I think today there are structural challenges which lead me to believe that we won't see much growth in the near term, primarily being tax treatment. So in the US, you have to do the accounting on your cost basis for every time you spend Bitcoin. You have to pay tax on that. And it's a huge headache. And especially in the West, where we have good payment networks already. So you have to use a more frictioned product, Bitcoin, that costs more in terms of accounting and tax. And so I don't expect much growth in the West anytime soon. But we do need to be building out the infrastructure and having the tools available so that if and when tax treatment changes, we have the tools ready to grow the medium of exchange side of Bitcoin. Now, if you're in a developing country, I think that's totally flipped. Africa has something like 2,000 payment networks, and most of them don't interoperate. And so in that world, the Lightning Network-based payment system that connects the continent under one standard, I could see that growing really fast. I could also see using stablecoins or using Lightning Network for cross-border payments becoming very popular. It already is relatively popular, but that's a strict improvement over cross-border flows today. And so I think those are the 2 areas where we will see growth. it's also a chicken and egg problem, right? If no one spends their Bitcoin, why would the government want to change the payment side of the tax treatment? And so it's quite sort of like, yeah, you can brute force adoption today, but it's not sustainable. But we do need some growth in adoption and payments in order to convince the government to get rid of the tax treatment. So, and the other angle is if Bitcoin's going up and up and up and up for the near term, why would we be spending that when we could easily spend fiat? And so again, it's a whole portfolio of structural disadvantages today. I also um, I don't have the same concerns maybe as Jack or Jeff in the short term. I don't think it's like we got to get payments bootstrapped in 3 years or Bitcoin's cooked. I don't see it that way at all. I think we have way more time than that. And so
Yeah,
long term problem, work on it now, but don't have unrealistic expectations. That's how I see it.
yeah, I already can't because I earn in Bitcoin most of my income, so I'm forced to sell it, and obviously I would prefer not to spend, would prefer not to have to pay fees to sell it and all those things. Um, but I love the idea to just have as much Bitcoin exposure as possible without going into debt. Like I'm just not a fan of debt. I'm just not a fan of like borrowing against the Bitcoin and all those things. I might change my opinion on that down the line, but right now I'm just not a fan of it. So I just like to have Bitcoin and buy and sell according to how I need it, which is I call it the Zen state of the mind, because you're really like in a nice position. You don't have to worry about any financial engineering. And I'm also in a special situation, not only because I earn Bitcoin, but also in Austria, if you've bought your Bitcoin before 2021, those Bitcoin are tax free. So you can sell them tax free if you bought them before 2021, because before 2021, all the Bitcoin that you bought and hold longer than 1 year, you can completely sell them tax free. This rule is no longer there since 2021. But if you have bought before, I think February 2021 is the exact date, all those Bitcoin are completely tax free and you can spend them as much as you want. So I do not have to pay capital gains tax and earn in Bitcoin. So those are two things that just incentivize me to use it as money. So I see why my position might be special and not normal for most people, and that's why I just like Bitcoin as a payment system. But I also see we are freaking early to that to that thing.
Yeah, I think your example is the exception that proves the rule, right? If you have unique circumstances from your government, from your personal life, you're getting paid in Bitcoin, et cetera, totally makes sense. But to convince the average person to spend Bitcoin versus their local currency is just crazy.
Yeah, I also don't like the idea of spend and replace. Like I think if you have a fiat income and buy Bitcoin and then sell it to spend it and then buy it again, you're just feeding the exchanges. Like, okay, you're from Swan, you like might be good, but like it for me, it makes more sense. If you have fiat income, you just get your fiat income, set aside the fiat that you need for the month, buy with the rest Bitcoin, and then with the fiat income that you still have, you can pay the bills, maybe have some buffer for surprise expenses like, oh shit, my phone dropped, or like my car broke down, or like I need to repair the roof on my like house, or whatever comes your way. Maybe that also. So that's probably the best like setup for everyone. And if you're not a lunatic like me.
Yeah, I agree. If I was in your situation, I'd probably be operating the same.
I'm curious on two more things. The first one is Myers-Briggs. I think your pinned tweet is something around the Bitcoin personalities. Have you been involved in that study that kind of tried like 2,000 or 3,000 Bitcoiners and how they are doing in personality-wise versus the general population?
Yeah, so I did the first study in 2021 just on Twitter. And then I added up all the responses, put them in a spreadsheet, and then visualized the data and did a little thread analyzing the findings.
Wait, you were
And
the guy
then,
that did that?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I love that. I've been spreading that thing for a long time. Sorry, I haven't connected you to this thing. Oh, amazing.
That's okay. It's a popular topic. It comes up every couple months and it blows up all over Twitter and then disappears and comes back. And so, because I kept seeing it as a recurring theme, I decided to redo the study again in 2025. So, a couple weeks ago, I put out a Google form tracking the data, and we have 1,100 responses or more already. And so, I don't think we'll get too many more. And so I'm currently analyzing all that data with my friend ChatGPT, and we're creating charts and tables and ways to display that information. And I'll publish it at some point here, just not finding much time to work on it. But there are some very interesting findings. Actually, before I go into that, I've also found a survey on Bitcoin Talk Forum from 2013. There's only like 100, 120 responses. So we have 2013, we have 2021, and now 2025 survey data. And in the 2025 survey, I also asked, when did you first adopt Bitcoin? So you can kind of see, are the Myers-Briggs breakdowns changing over time, right? Is the Bitcoiner different in 2013 than in 2025? So that'll all come out in the analysis. But some of the quick takeaways, let's see, 94% of Bitcoiners have an N in there. And so that's the type of big thinker, forward thinking, complex theory, analyze trends, stuff like that. No surprise that Bitcoiners are overweight there. Only 20% of the general population has that N. So it's a massive distribution shift. And another one that was funny is S and J. 35% of the general population are SJ and 0% of Bitcoiners. Right. So again, there's a huge shift. The other one is the master plan archetypes. These are the two most common ones, INTJ and INTP. 57% of the respondents are one of those two. And that's a 15 times overrepresentation compared to the general public. And so there you go. There's some major, major ones skewing that. Now, to caveat the data slightly, there's some biases here. First bias is you have to be a Bitcoiner on Twitter, and you have to be a relatively early adopter in general. And so does this account for the average Bitcoiner? Probably not. It accounts for the average Bitcoiner on Twitter, right? And Twitter users have a bias, early adopters have a bias, etc. And so I don't want to make this as a broad analysis of anyone who owns Bitcoin, right? Because there's clearly some bias there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a huge difference. When I talk with my guest and I kind of make a picture of like where are my guests at, and I have like 540, 530 guests at that point on my podcast, different guests on my podcast, then it's like this is a whole different crowd to who's listening to the podcast. Because if I make community questions actually every single day. I ask, oh, do you have self-custody? Or like, how bullish are you on this year? Like a bunch of different questions just to figure out like, where is my community at? For example, if I ask all my guests, do you have self-custody? I would assume most of them actually have. Like I'm probably like 80% plus, like 90% plus. There's only a few instances where they say like, oh, I don't have it, or I keep it there, or like very rarely, probably like 95% actually of my guests have self-custody. From my viewers, only like 40 to 50% have self-custody. So that's like a whole different level. The guests like long in there. So like the point I was trying to make is there's a difference between people that are actively seeking out information on Twitter and maybe participating in surveys. This is a whole different crowd to people that are just like, oh, they watch like 2-3 podcasts on Bitcoin, they buy it, and they just keep having a DCA and forget about it. And that's most Bitcoiners. Like most Bitcoiners are not lunatics like us on Twitter. Most Bitcoiners are DCA, watched a few podcasts, maybe read some books, and like just set it and forget it. Like they're not as active as we might want them to be. So it's a very good kind of nuance to those studies where we get more the active crowd that actually is like involved in Bitcoin, and not so the whole Bitcoin community, and not the whole Bitcoin thing. So it would be fun if that thing, and I mean, you work at Swan, if that thing is sent out to all customers at like Swan and like big exchanges, and like what comes back there versus what is coming back on Twitter, because I personally think those two things will be very different.
That's a great point. I'm gonna have to bring that up internally and see if we can't get that survey out. And it also brings up an interesting point that you referenced there, which is that the rabbit hole dwellers, the obsessive learning people, which are earlier to Bitcoin, those folks will continually become a lesser and lesser percentage of the total Bitcoiners, right? We already captured all those people. The future adopters, they're not going to go down the rabbit hole. They're going to buy it because their friend told them to, and they don't know shit about it, but they do it because they trust their friend. They're not going to listen to podcasts 40 hours a week. They're going to just peek in, buy a little bit of IBIT in their retirement account and forget about it, right? And so when we think about adoption trends in the future, I think one challenge is that most Bitcoin content is written by these INTP, INTJ folks for the INTP, right? So we're not really communicating with the next wave of retail very good or very well. And so, yeah, that's an interesting thing for anyone trying to drive mainstream adoption is you have to communicate differently. Your message, you have to use the reputation of the influencers for the normies, right? You have to dumb it down. You have to make it in terms that they understand.
I was a few months ago on a German-speaking small podcast here that is on, and that wasn't about Bitcoin at all, but they were curious about Bitcoin. And the question there was so like the questions I got was like, oh, like couldn't the government like just control Bitcoin and make it like a central bank digital currencies? Like, what's the difference between a stable coin and Bitcoin? And like very fundamental beginner questions where we really dove into like, oh, how is Bitcoin even decentralized? Like isn't there a server somewhere that we can just like turn off? Like those questions are like, oh shit, like I'm in a bubble. The things that we two are talking about is not the things that someone that is just getting started good for. I see my podcast as like the second touch point to someone getting orange pilled. Someone is already interested in Bitcoin, then they can go on the podcast and go really deep down the rabbit hole and learn really deeply about what Bitcoin actually is. But it's not your first video. It might be your second video. So it's still in the very early stages. And I'm thinking actually of like making like a playlist with like maybe like 5-6 guests and like making maybe 5 to 10 podcasts like just for beginners and having just a playlist like, oh, like if you're completely new, like never watched any Bitcoin video, like probably should start there and like not dive deep there. But yeah, I haven't come around to that. But we, especially as content creators, we should be aware of what we're doing and who we are catering to. And I'm fully aware that my podcast is for is for newbies, but like also for a lot of advanced ones. I have the YouTube members and I talk with them. And those people are super advanced. they know so much in Bitcoin. I'm like, oh, why do you watch my podcast? Like, oh, I like it. I'm like, yeah, but you already know those things. They like it. But the new people need different, like they need really like structured videos, like what the hell is Bitcoin? How does a blockchain work? And like, why is it decentralized?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's good that you already identified which segment of the market you serve. Very, very important. And I think on a tactical side, how do we reach mainstream? We just need to plant that little seed so that then they go do their own research. And I think that a good way to do that is to get on large mainstream podcasts that are not Bitcoin podcasts and send our advocates there and give a generic overview and sort of generate interest. And then hopefully some percentage of them will start seeking information out on their own terms. But That I think that is the big key. And if you remember 2021, example, a bunch of people went on Lex Friedman's podcast, massive podcast. Lex was starting to fall down the rabbit hole, kind of. And so he had on like Breedlove, Nick Carter, Seyfedine, whoever else. And I think a lot of people will get a first touch in a way like that. It just appears in their normal information stream on their favorite podcast. They listen to it reluctantly and they're like, huh, okay, Bitcoin's more interesting than I thought. The bullish case from an investment standpoint makes sense. I better go buy some. And as soon as they buy a little bit, I think that's all that needs to happen, because then they're going to start paying attention to the price. They're going to say it went up they doubled their money. Oh man, I wish I would have put in more than $500. And that starts their journey.
I 100% agree. We have one question that I asked every single guest of mine, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
I think the theme of this one is about ecology and mycology. So I would say that the best thing that you can learn from me is the introductory stuff about mycelium and the fungal kingdom in general. Highly recommend Mycelium of Money. It's a long read, but there's 4 parts. You can chunk it out, and kind of my secret mission there is to mushroom pill all the Bitcoiners. And to my surprise, now I have never-ending inbound from Bitcoiners sharing stuff about mycelium and new research here and over there. And so I think it's equally as interesting as Bitcoin, and it's a deep, deep rabbit hole. I think Bitcoiners will find a home falling down that rabbit hole. And if you want the quick and dirty intro to get you excited in the same way that Bitcoiners on Lex Friedman got people excited, just look up Paul Stamets TED Talk. Paul Stamets is the most popular person educating about mushrooms. And he's got like a 20-minute TED Talk, 6 ways mushrooms can save the world. That's amazing. That's what sent me down the rabbit hole, however long ago that was, 15 years ago or something.
You should add a 7th way, and it's Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. I've been talking to Paul about this for years, and yeah, he's caught up in like blockchains more so than Bitcoin. I don't think he has the economic base to properly understand what this Bitcoin thing is. But I would love for him to get on the Bitcoin train and orange pill all the mushroom people too.
I would love to have him on once he's there with Bitcoin. Really cool. We have Andrew Tain in the podcast, as you might know, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And your question from the previous guest is, if you could have dinner with 3 people, alive or dead, who would they be?
Say Nikola Tesla would be number 1. I think he had a bunch of scientific discoveries that we haven't fully fleshed out yet. And I think there's some interesting directions in his understanding of energy and how we could harness it in a way that's more effective. So that'd be number 1. Let's see. I'd probably pick someone like Genghis Khan, just to hear the point of view of taking over the steppe. I find that story fascinating. And then I would probably go with whoever built Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe is an ancient megalithic structure in Turkey, and it's dated to around 12,500 years ago. And it's an enormous structure. And our current understanding of archaeology says that at that time, we were just separate bands of hunter-gatherers. We didn't have agriculture, and we didn't have populations large enough to create such a megalithic structure, right? You need thousands and thousands and thousands of people in a city just to produce enough food so that you can have some people working on this megalith all day. And so I think that's one of the biggest mysteries of our history as a species. And I would love to know who built it and why.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. Really interesting answers, man. Really cool. Perfect. And thank you so much for that. Before I let you go, where can people find you, reach out to you, and see all those great articles that you wrote?
Yeah, essays are at brandonquittem.com. You can find me on Twitter at bquittem. Links are all there. Easy to find me there. If you want to get started buying Bitcoin as an American, go to swan.com, and we serve all retail investors. We serve high net worth investors, businesses. If you want to buy Bitcoin in a retirement account with tax advantages, we can do that too. And if you want to get started on your self-custody journey, We have a collaborative custody 2 of 3 multi-sig product called Swan Vault. That's kind of a nice balance between security and convenience for your custody. Clients hold 2 keys. Swan helps out with the 3rd key. So it's kind of like a nice middle ground. Yeah, that's where you can find me. DMs are open on Twitter. Come say hello.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brandon, for being on the show. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.